Hey y'all, welcome to our second episode of Immune to Ignorance.
Women in Science Speak Out.
I'm Dr. Jamie,
And I'm Dr. Olivia.
and today the topic that we're going to be covering is we're going to talk about some banned words that were sent out on a list to the NSF, or the National Science Foundation.
And we want to note that similar lists of terms are being sent to various institutions, including the National Institutes of Health. It's based on an executive order, 14151, ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing. And they have basically targeted a whole bunch of really common scientific vernacular and grant language that people use. And that's kind of what we want to go over from a very scientific perspective, help you understand that the words that were chosen from a scientific perspective, from someone who wrote grants, got grants funded, reads papers from the scientific literature, is pretty outrageous. So
Yeah, and the reason that this is important, so these banned words are basically, they've been given out to lists from people from these institutions that are responsible for reviewing grant applications. And so what this means is basically these people are deciding whether or not a grant is going to be reviewed, or a grant is going to be actually funded. So this list of words is essentially saying, if your grant includes XYZ words in the title, then automatically it's not getting funded. And if it's not getting funded, then that means that type of work is not going to be done, basically.
I think it's in the whole, isn't it in the whole grant?
Well,
I'm not sure if it's just the title. Is it just the title?
Well, so they actually sent out a flow chart that started with are these words present in the title? If they are, automatically gone. Then if no, then you go to the abstract.
Okay,
yeah.
Title or abstract contain keywords and context.
Yeah. So and this list is rather extensive. And is some of the words are quite appalling. So we are going to go through some of those terms, and and Dr. Livy is going to talk about some specific instances where this makes absolutely no sense.
So according to the flowchart, they'll start by looking at the title and the abstract. If it does have the words, then they retain flag and they carry it on. If it doesn't, they continue reviewing the award. So then they review the project summary. If it's not in there, then they review the project description. And they continue on throughout the application. So basically, they're going to catch it if it's anywhere in the body of the application.
Right. Yeah, and so if you use these words in your grant application, then you are not going to be doing that research with government funding from places like the NSF and the NIH. And we aren't going to show the list here on the video, but we will have a link to the list in the show notes, so you can check that full list out there. But
I would suggest opening it up and following along, and we're just going to highlight some particularly egregious ones that really show how incompetent and lacking knowledge the people who just determined this are.
And before you start, Livy, honestly, I want to point out one thing that just as we're doing Immune to Ignorance, Women in Science, and one thing I do want to point out is of all the words that you find in there, a couple choice words you find is the word female, and words that you do not find in there. I think it's female and woman, but of course words that don't appear in this banned list of words is man and male. So I just wanted to throw that one out there. I don't think anything needs to be said about how egregious that is, but
and I think we know that this administration hates women. I mean, it's very apparent, so we don't have to really harp on it too much. I think that a lot of other people that are into content creation, which is not, we're scientists, we don't really, this is new to us. We'll go over a lot of the societal, social justice implications of banning LGBTQ and banning women, and so forth.
And racial
women get autoimmune diseases at higher rates than men do. There are X-linked diseases, so if you have two X chromosomes versus one, that alters the way that the disease is transmitted genetically, as well as the way that it appears and symptoms, etc., and so forth. To be able to stratify by sex in biomedical research is a requirement. It is a very basic requirement. I mean, I did type 1 diabetes research. We use a non-obese diabetic mouse model, and the mice we use are all female. And this is because the females reliably develop type 1 diabetes around 12 to 18 weeks of age within this particular statistical amount, and the males don't. And the actual human disease is also different, appears differently based on sex. Mm-hmm. So and even if you're not going to be like, this is horrendous because they hate women, they don't want to study what, women's body parts, they don't want to study ways to make us safer, ways for drugs to work better on our bodies, even though we have different muscles, different receptors, different hormones. Like, it's also just basically ablating science at the root of it.
Yeah, and I think even, like, with stuff like that, it's like, having these banned lists of words, like, if we're working on, like you said, with diabetic mice and they're all female, right, like, we need to be able to be precise in science, and like, yeah, and we have to use those types of mice to actually study diabetes, and we need to be precise when we report that type of information and when we ask for grant funding. So it might say, study of blah blah blah
125 female nod mice,
right, and female nod mice,
were
blah blah
stratified into these groups.
Yeah. And by banning these words, really, like, the consequence is going to end up being that we'll just remove that language from the grant altogether, and now we just have a less precise reporting of the science. And I don't think anybody wants that.
So let's go into, like, we're going to kind of avoid racial justice. I think that other people in other fields will have a better context about that to really, like, go into depth about what kind of research is done in those fields. That's not what we do.
Yeah.
But as immunologists and cellular biologists, let's talk about banning the word barrier.
That's a good one.
Like the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah.
The membrane that protects your central nervous system from things in your bloodstream.
Yeah.
And the differential ability of things to pass through the blood-brain barrier has to do with dosage.
Right. These are just regular science words.
How about the intestinal barrier?
Yeah. The mucosal barrier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where you have a lot of immune cells, you have a lot of things going on, and nutrients are being taken up. And
right. Yeah, talk about taking, like, a word from, like, list of key terms in, some subsect of physiology or a disease and saying, oh, no, you can't use that word anymore. You need to come up with a new word.
It's like, outrageous. And as you develop through your scientific career, as you read more papers, as you go to more conferences, it is a language into itself. Like, is, you become very familiar with certain words and terminology that helps us understand each other. We understand that we're talking about the same thing. And it's like
so that we can actually properly communicate with one another.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I could say the mucosa, right? But saying the mucosal barrier versus the mucosa is something different when I'm talking from me to a scientist or another scientist. And that's really important when we're doing our work. So if now we either can't study that or we can't use those words because Donald Trump said so, that's a problem.
And this is all to do with censorship, right? Like, this is entirely a topic of fascist censorship.
Yeah.
Particularly of science.
All right, so then let's go through, like, what are some of the other words?
How about bias?
Oh, bias. That's good. Yeah.
Like a statistical bias.
Yeah.
Like if you have systematic errors in how your experiment was designed or how the statistics were run, that causes your results to deviate from the actual value.
Right, and this is not about DEI for us.
So you can have in your grant application, to avoid bias, statistical bias, we performed this test, or we included this control group.
Right.
And this would flag you.
Right.
How about groups?
Oh, groups.
I'm sure they're trying to ban groups of people because they hate different groups of people.
Right.
But there's also treatment groups.
Right. Groups,
like,
anything, yeah. Yeah.
One group was treated with the drug. The control group was not treated with the drug. That's in almost every paper.
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah.
Enhancing.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's hard enough, sometimes, like, when you're trying to, like, come up, how you can't say the same word, you don't want it to say, like, increases, enhances, elevates. So
now they're further limiting you.
Now we can't use enhance, so that sucks, so I guess I'll just use increase always.
Yeah, you could say like administration of drug X enhances the survival of the mice in model Y.
Right.
You know, like something like that. You could say that, yeah, but you can't.
But you can't.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You could say that expression of this gene is enhancing the expression of another gene, but now you can't.
Right. Not funded. Can't study. You can't study that.
You're done.
No.
Yeah.
I think, why don't you just read off some of these too, like, as we're going through, like, just
some of the other ones?
Yeah, let's quickly,
so some of them are, like, horrendous, you know, like, disabilities, discrimination, backgrounds.
Yeah, that's
really bad.
That's actually a big one that we work with in mouse studies, when we talk about, like, on a black 6 background, which is like which is a type of mouse that we use, for instance, and that matters.
The wild type mouse.
Yeah, it's like what background
on that background you can create a mutation, for example.
Right.
So you mutated a gene and it's in the black 6 wild type background.
Right.
Then you can use black 6 mice as your control.
Right.
That sort of thing.
Yeah, or you introduce a mutation and you say, okay, yeah, I have the mutation in gene X that I'm studying, and they're on a black 6 background, and therefore my controls are normal wild type black 6.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we can't use that.
Let's see. Obviously, diversity, equitable, ethnicity. I want you to know that very many diseases, particularly autoimmune diseases, they have different like mutations, and often it's a single nucleotide polymorphism that predisposes someone or protects someone from disease. So with type 1 diabetes, there's like hundreds that have been found. Like a single nucleotide changed could be associated with that population of people who have that developing disease. And those often cluster based on ethnicity. And this is not a question of like any way that someone would defend differences in genetics with a racist lean. It's just a population of people that's been separate over there. They have a higher incidence of a certain like little change that maybe is in a major histocompatibility allele that maybe like leads to development of disease. Excluded. That's going to be really fun for people with clinical trials. Like patients with pre-existing conditions were excluded from the trial.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you need to, I mean, in almost every clinical trial, that's like a section, like the criterion for which it's called the exclusion criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's called the exclusion criteria, and you have to have that so that you explain how you decided to enroll patients into a clinical trial.
And it's also, I actually bolded and put down something for inclusion, because people perform meta-analyses. And they might say, like, our search strategy yielded 134 articles, and one article met our inclusion and exclusion criteria. And meta-analyses is like when you take a whole bunch of papers and you kind of like combine the results of like these independent studies. The papers are investigating a similar question, and you're basically trying to summarize what all of the work done on this question kind of leads to in a very statistical fashion. So you could actually draw conclusions. You're not just like, it's not your opinion. There's ways to do meta-analyses, including inclusion and exclusion criteria.
Yeah.
Increase.
Oh no, so I can't use increase?
No!
I can't use increase or enhance?
Nothing increases. PD-L1 expression does not increase.
No, you can't increase anything.
Nope. Nothing.
Wow. These are just normal words.
They're all the words. I don't know what you would even
words.
say. Like, I mean, we could thesaurus it. But it would sound, like, think about it, like, when you want to say, like, the expression of you know, CD5 increased, or the expression of whatever.
Yeah.
And you had to use a different word, like, your brain would, like, trigger when you read it.
Yeah, we're gonna, like,
it'd be so clunky, you'd be like, why did they say that?
Yeah, like, we're gonna say, like, modulates, which is, like, not a good word. Or,
no,
like,
it's not.
That doesn't mean anything.
It could modulate it positively or negatively. So once again, you're losing specificity, and you're losing, like, how...
Just, like, clarity. Like, like, the conciseness of language is, like, Yeah, so I think all of this is to say that, you know, I think that, you know, by banning these words, I mean, some people are going to have to just change the language that they're using, which is, you know, annoying, and creates or makes the process like more difficult. But I think it's also going to have a chilling effect, you know, on some sects of research that aren't that aren't about DEI. This is about cancer research. This is about research into infections. This is about research into chronic diseases. And
while we want to make this point, I want it to be known that, like, I am a vicious, like, proponent of doing what they call DEI research into different groups of people, into trans people and their healthcare and all of it. Like, we're trying to point out that, like, it's gonna impact all of medical science, but it's also absolutely disgusting to try to prevent that sort of research from being done. Those people exist. They're real.
Yeah,
their healthcare
is real. What we do. Yeah,
I know. I keep on. It's like a disclaimer I don't want to have to keep making, but, like, it does make me furious. But we also want to say, like, you're not gonna have cancer research. You're not gonna have immunology research. Like, if you continue to let these ignoramuses
decide
like,
what
harass,
decide what words we use,
cancel grants, pause grants. People have submitted grants, and then it was flagged for terms, and then it was delayed so long that they no longer have a position in their group, because their salary can't be paid. By the institution doesn't have the slush money to pay their salary and what they needed from the grant that was approved.
Right.
Like, this is theft.
And that was, like, also happening because of the crazy blow up with stopping the meetings and firing a bunch of people. And I know personally people who just, like, didn't hear about their grant. They just didn't even know. And then and then even some that were told that their grant got funded, but then because they didn't meet, it didn't actually go through the whole process, and then they had to resubmit. And sometimes those time frames, like, that could shut a lab down. I mean, it's just like, if you understand small business or, whatever makes sense to you, like, if you don't get that money in, you have to stop operating. And you can't take students. You miss opportunities. You miss meetings. And it has a chilling effect on the entire scientific research industry.
And I just want to be so clear. Don't let anyone obfuscate what is really going on here. This is an attempt to destroy scientific research in the United States. This is not to save money. I mean, a lot of people are saying, I've seen a lot of researchers saying on the internet that what they think is that they are actually completely causing all these bottlenecks and failures in the ability for grants to get funded. Like, if you interrupt someone's grant that was like $1 million or whatever, and then now they're fired because it missed the deadline for them to stay in their group.
Right.
Then the Doge, I won't even describe what I think of them, can all that money that is not spent because they slashed at the entire organization that handles that, they can then say that the NIH didn't need it, and then they can steal it. I want you to understand this is theft. They are stealing from the American people.
Yeah.
They are going to, God knows, do what with that money. Maybe pass it to Elon Musk. Who knows?
Yeah.
Like, I really don't know. But I promise you, they're going to start talking about, well, this money billion they didn't need it. It wasn't allocated. It's like, because you prevented it from being allocated. You did that on purpose. It has nothing to do with saving anything. You have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, you mean that they're saying that, like, oh, if that person could just go away, then it's, and
if you don't give the money out,
right,
then the money's still there. And then they could say, look at all of this waste. Why, like, the money, you know what I mean? There's, like, all this left over.
Well, that doesn't make any sense because you're not producing more scientific knowledge, which is what it would otherwise do.
If you don't know anything, then maybe you're just like, maybe that's enough scientific knowledge.
I guess so. I mean, yeah, like,
maybe there was enough this year.
Yeah, and I mean, if that's what the American people voted for and that's what they want, like, which I don't think that's the case, like I think one thing that I want to make clear is that this is going to reduce the amount of scientific research to cure diseases, to advance medications and pharmaceuticals, to advance medical technology. It is going to slow that down. Bar none, that is happening right now in the United States. People are not going to become scientists. People are not staying in the industry. And as we suck money out of it, we are going to be less of a leader in medical and scientific research in the world.
One of the reasons why we're making this podcast is because, there's immense political power in scientific research. But the people that are actually carrying it out, like the scientists, the researchers, the university administrators, they don't know how to wield any of that political power. And that's kind of what the Trump administration is like banking on. And I'm seeing it in real time. Like when you're doing these sort of careers, you don't really have the bandwidth to, like, I mean, just the struggle it's been to even get together to do this. Like on top of what we have going on and like coping with what's going on and like trying to predict what's going to happen to our companies and to our jobs and try to make plans for the future, the stress of it. Like they're trying to bank on the fact that they're blitzing us and causing so much stress and anxiety and like job loss and in the most educated people that are really trying to help other people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can go get a manufacturing job, you know, instead
of
being scientists.
They don't. I'd be like, why? Why do you manufacture? They'd be like, girl, press the button, okay?
Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is this executive order that is supposed to be improving the safety and security of biological research, or that's the actual title of it. So Livy's going to talk more about that.
Yes, this came out recently. It's all about gain of function research. And we're going to start out by talking about the new director of the NIH. His name is Jay Bhattacharya. He's an MD with a PhD in economics. All fine and good. We looked up his citations. A lot of them are very economics based. So hearing him say things like, probably the most important example is something that the president just issued an executive order about. He ordered that dangerous gain of function research not be conducted, not be supported by the US government, certainly not by the NIH. Money spent on that was not money well spent. There are other kinds of research priorities that previous NIH directors had that I think were not advancing science. So what this tells you is that the man running the NIH, whose PhD is economics, does not know what gain of function means.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about that a little bit more, about how it seems like this executive order came from a rationale that was kind of stemming from the COVID pandemic, where there is this fear that researchers are diabolically in their labs, like adding virulence factors to viruses and bacteria so that they can take over the world or whatever, you know. Like,
when no one has it in their grant specific aims.
I'm
going to make a super
influenza
bug, or something. And even if we are not going to go into because we're not geneticists. We don't do these sort of experiments. I don't have the expertise to speak on engineering scars that might be present if someone had manipulated COVID-19.
Right.
And so on and so forth, and why the scientific community does not believe that was the case.
Yeah.
We're not going to go into that.
Yeah, there are some people that still support the Wuhan lab hypothesis, but that has largely not been accepted by the scientific community. But of course there are people that still believe that, and we will never actually know.
But beyond that, nobody is saying I'm going to make a super HIV. That's not being done.
Yeah, and it's not getting funded.
And what this insane executive order that is super broad, that is created by people without the knowledge to be trying to control such research is going to do is it's going to catch in its net actual really meaningful cancer research, immunological research, so on and so forth. So a gain of function screen, as an experiment, is a way to identify genes and proteins that when they are overexpressed result in a change in the phenotype or the functioning of the cell. That's literally the definition. So it's all over the literature. It's all over websites for people that sell oligonucleotides, for example, or cell lines. And that's what it's referring to. It is not referring to making a virus more virulent. In the broad sense, gain of function studies are done all the time to try to better understand what a gene or protein does, especially in context of diseases like cancer and other genetic diseases, so on and so forth. And there's also the other side of the coin that they don't even know exists probably, so it wasn't mentioned, which is a loss of function study, which is that when you have an absence or inactivation of a gene or a protein, that leads to a particular phenotype. So we don't mention that, though. I guess you could just still do those.
Yeah, and it's also
that's fine.
It's also a weird kind of definitional playground. Like when you start talking about gain of functions and loss of functions, I mean, you could lose one function that then leads to a gain of function in another gene or another protein. So, because everything in biology is kind of dynamic, and there's inhibitors and there's activators. So, I mean, you could lose the function of an inhibitor that is going to cause the gain of function of something else. So, the blanketly saying gain of function is somehow dangerous or is a type of research that should not be done is just going to preclude the conduction of research that is necessary to learn more about how our bodies and our cells work.
And we're going to go into a really specific example of this. So we're going to talk about microRNAs. So if you're familiar with the central dogma of just molecular biology, molecular genetics, it's that the DNA is the blueprint, it's transcribed to RNA, and that's translated to protein. That's how all the proteins in all of your cells and tissues are created. However, like all things in nature, it's like actually infinitely more complex than that. So there's actually little bitty RNAs that have other functions that the cells create. And one of them is microRNAs. They're short, they're non-coding, which means that they're never translated into a protein. They're like 20 to 22 nucleotides in length. And they will actually repress genes. They target other messenger RNA that will become proteins, and they knock down genes. So these are these are super, like, I think 60% of protein coding genes are modulated at some point in your cell's lifetime by microRNA. It's just a natural way that the cell functions. Like, let's say the cell is like, I need to divide now. So I'm going to create microRNA that knocks down the genes involved in some other process to switch my energy to dividing. And this is just completely normal. It's well characterized and studied. So there's this paper by Nakano et al. They used a library of 319 microRNA mimics, which just means you could create a synthetic version of that 20 to 22 nucleotides. And it's in a library, it's in plates, and they did a gain of function screen in human epithelial ovarian cancer cells.
Right, so this would fall into the category of gain of function.
Yes, and not only would their research be flagged, and I think in the executive order it says some insane punishment, like 5 years of ban from, like, this is just like to bully and like terrify scientists out of doing this research.
You're a science criminal now.
Into ovarian cancer.
Yeah.
Okay. So they found out that several microRNAs did decrease the viability of the cancer cells. So those little microRNAs were going and silencing genes, and the result was that those cancer cells didn't grow as much. So this really shows that microRNA are valuable cancer biomarkers, can be therapeutics, and this is the sort of research that would be silenced by this executive order. These are the kind of people that are going to be like, am I going to have like legal repercussions, be banned from science for a certain amount of years or whatever.
Right. And so what that amounts to is, like, basically they're finding targets that could be potential for treatments for cancer. That's what this microRNA gain of function study did.
So I want to restate, the definition of a gain of function experiment is when a gene or protein is overexpressed, it has an effect or enhanced function in the cells or organisms. And in the executive order, it says, like, agents. MicroRNA could be considered to be an agent.
I think it definitely would be.
Yes. I mean, that's the most broad terminology to use, like agent. So yeah, in this case, those specific microRNAs result in reduced tumor cell growth when they're overexpressed or exogenously applied. So they are gain of function agents and would be banned. And so it's just really important to know that, like, the gain of function research that they're attempting to say that they're banning is not the same as how it is, like, used in the field of genetics and immunology and so on and so forth. And, like, why is it important? Like, they also talked about, like, the infectivity of a pathogen. Okay. They're like, don't study anything that increases the infectivity of a pathogen. And it's like, okay, why would it be important to see which microRNA increases the infectivity of HIV? That's because the microRNA is knocking down certain genes, which in that case are apparently, you could conclude or, like, further test, have a role in protection from HIV.
Yeah. And so you have to do these studies so that we can actually learn really important information about how to prevent the spread of pathogens, how to prevent the mutation of pathogens, because they're going to mutate. Like, we've seen that. We know that now with COVID. And if putting a complete moratorium on gain of function is really going to limit what we understand about pathogens and how they spread, and also just about our own bodies, and like we just mentioned with cancer research.
Exactly. And apparently the current leadership at the NIH, which has been gutted, and I know to the very top they have been replaced with just puppets, just has demonstrated a lack of understanding of these basic concepts. And so maybe they shouldn't speak on them. Like maybe the Trump administration shouldn't be making rules about what kind of research someone could do or not do, and arbitrarily making lists of terms that are banned that include systemic and include, we already talked about all of that. And I think the conclusion of like this episode is that all of these acts that are going on is to deliberately destroy research in the United States in order to gain control over universities, who a lot of their money comes from biomedical science and research. And this is not something that is easy for like Trump, et cetera, to control, and they want to destroy it. And that's what they're doing on purpose. It's not a mistake. It's not to try to save money. There's no legitimate reason.
Yeah, and also, like, this is censorship, plain and simple. Like, I mean, you are literally giving lists of words that we are not allowed to say in the country that celebrates our freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. They are deciding, as the federal government, that you cannot use words like increase on a grant application. Okay, so this is the world we're living in, and it's really scary for scientists, and I hope that this gives you some insight into where the Trump administration's policies are kind of affecting the scientific research, and what effect that might have moving forward, and the effect it's going to have on science for years.
There are professionals that have been cut from the federal government them and their teams have been in place for decades and replaced by like some young idiots, and pretending that that's to increase efficiency is a joke.
Yeah.
It is to decrease efficiency. It is to destroy the functioning of these institutions so that then they can point their fingers and say, look, it doesn't work. Look, we prevented them from distributing grant money, so obviously they didn't need all of this funding.
Right, which is, yeah.
Because they want to cut NIH funding from whatever, like around $50 billion to around $27 billion.
Yeah.
I cannot describe that that's the end of research in the United States.
Yeah. Or, like, if not the end, it's going to shrink it.
Considering that they're affecting everyone's grants, like, when they're cutting it out of indirect costs, it's not like they're only closing some labs or some grants. They're actually going to cause like major issues for everyone who has an
institutions.
ROI. Everyone. Like it's just very apparently it's very apparent what the purpose is and like why this is being done. It's an anti-intellectual fascist censorship, punishing people who are educated and like work really hard and are passionate about human health, because they're more difficult to control. And are not directly benefiting Donald Trump and his cronies.
Yeah. All right, so I guess we'll leave you guys with that. Until next time, write your senators. Speak up. If you have something to say something. If you see something, say something. Drop a comment on the show, and we'll see you next time.